over to Mr. Isayama. Thank you very much for the round of introductions. And the WHILL and WHILL are pronounced similarly, but we are two different companies. So we'll start with a short presentation on the onset. And now I would like to briefly introduce the panelists. Now this is a very, very simple introduction. So we'll start off with Mr. Matsuda. Now, he originally used to work for IBM Japan, and he established SOURCENEXT Corporation, and he is now listed in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Now, he is living in Silicon Valley. He resides in Silicon Valley at the moment, so there are some mysteries surrounding what he actually does, so we would like to maybe probe into that. And now, we have Mr. Sugie. Originally, he used to work at Nissan as an engineer, and he also worked as a Japanese tutor. And then he went on to Silicon Valley, and he has now created WHILL. And so he is focusing on a small EV company, and he is working currently in Silicon Valley. So that was Mr. Sugie. Now, Mr. Yoshikawa, he worked at Red Hat, followed by Mitsui trading house. And then now, why did he establish Treasure Data? Again, I believe that we can hear of his background as well from him directly. And Mr. Hokamura, Bain, the consulting company, moving on to Apple, and now he owns his own venture company, and he has also established another company as well. And so while he manages his current company, he is also supporting the launch of Evernote Japan as well, and he is currently chairman of Evernote Japan. So we do have an extremely prominent panel today. So the title today of the session is Japanese in Silicon Valley. So the word Silicon Valley is well known. So let us start off with maybe 2-3 minutes each of explaining to the audience what Silicon Valley is. And when we look at it on the map, it's on the west coast, North California. So it is a portion of this area. So the red area on this map is Silicon Valley. And these are some tourist sites, San Francisco City, and these are also some venture capital areas, and we have the Sonoma area as well that you see in the red. Now, Silicon Valley is basically very concentrated in technology, so you may have this high-tech IT image of Silicon Valley, but in actuality, it is quite a rural area, and when you go throughout closer to the coast, you have these very lovely golf courses as well. So yes, it's an image, it carries the image of being high-tech, but it's actually quite a nice countryside. Now you see the Google campus picture as well. So it is more or less like a college campus. And Google resides in this campus, a very colorful setting, as you can note from this image. So this is often called the engineer paradise, and Google provides the environment to work 24/7. Now, that is Silicon Valley. Now, why Silicon Valley now? So I have some data points to prove some facts. Now, many people are launching ventures, but now the amount of investment here in Japan, approximately 120 billion, and the U.S., 3 trillion. So very big difference in the amount of capital, and angel investors exist in Silicon Valley. Close to 2 trillion are raised, and so risk money is most of it is concentrated in the Silicon Valley area. Now, this force, this power, obviously attracts and magnetizes other venture capitalists as well into this area. Now, another data point. Why do we often value venturism or venture capital in the U.S.? Now, when you compare this with the annual GDP, it's 0.2%. But this very minimal 0.2% actually is generating 21% of GDP. And it also actually encompasses 10%, even more than 10% of employment as well. So this is the potential cloud or the potential force that venture capital has. And here in Japan, we don't see that force yet. But on the contrary, we can say that if we very much focus on nurturing venture capital, then we can attain such numbers as well here in this country. Now, another quick example. These are absolute numbers, and I'm not sure if this is just for reference. And as of last Friday, Google had 37 trillion yen worth of market cap. Now, here in Japan, IT companies exceeding more than 100 billion. Only one company, well, 9 trillion actually. So a very big difference in terms of market cap. So maybe comparing ourselves with Google is not fair. So until recently, companies that did not exist. So companies that merged after the year 20,000. Still, if you combine all of these, 23 trillion market cap, and again in Japan, only 9 trillion yen market cap together. So again, the point here is that this market has tremendous potential to grow very, very rapidly. So going back to some other numbers. Now, Google, well, obviously they cannot compare with the top 10 ranking companies here in Japan when you augment the numbers. So even Google cannot compete. But in 1995, and now this was actually a benchmark year because Jerry Chan mentioned this as well, but this was the year that Yahoo IPO'd as well. So it was a benchmarking year. And 1995, if you combine all these, again, it's 101 trillion. And most of them are in Silicon Valley. So now I refer to some numbers, but now Japanese in Silicon Valley, perhaps they were allured by this sort of dynamic trend of Silicon Valley. So based on these numbers and this background, I would like to first ask Mr. Matsuda, a company that is listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Why are you in Silicon Valley? Well, as you just explained to us, Silicon Valley does not even have a population of 3 million. But with the top-ranking companies, they have an augmented market cap of more than 30 billion or more. So, if you want to create something, then Silicon Valley was a place to go. At least that was the trigger for myself. Now, I've visited Silicon Valley on very short business trips, but my role then was to find something new and great in Silicon Valley and then take that back to Japan. But it was a very short stay, 1 week, and then extended to 2 weeks, extended to 1 month. And the more I stayed in Silicon Valley, the more alliances and the more networking I was able to achieve. And so I realized that if I lived here, the possibilities were tremendous. Okay, so Hokamura-san, I know that you have a long experience at Silicon Valley, but why are you so focused on Silicon Valley?
My name is Hokamura. And I only put on a necktie once a year, but I have a cold and my throat is sore. Please forgive me. During my 5-year tenure in Apple, I decided to take a break from work, and I went with my wife to Europe for a trip and spent 2 years in Europe. But a friend in Apple said that he wanted to start up a company, and he invited me to join him. Now, there's a lot of Japanese reporters who say that I was an entrepreneur, but I was not an entrepreneur. There are a lot of people like that around me. And Mr. Matsuda is a different example of the type of person that is coming. But there are a lot of people who've come to Silicon Valley over the past 10 years who said that there's a blue skies that you can enjoy, so that's why they came to Silicon Valley, and I'm like that as well. But when I went there, I realized what kind of hardships and risks do not necessarily exist. There was a lot of things that were possible to do because of the people around you, and that's why I remained. Well, someone invited you to come to Silicon Valley, and you've stayed in Silicon Valley, and you've started up your own company, and you're still focused on Silicon Valley. Why is that the case? Well, there's a lot of exciting people. In Japan, you have to be cautious about various things, worry about not hurting people's feelings, and you have to spend a lot of energy on things other than what is core to your business. But there's a lot of stimulating conversation that you can hear in Silicon Valley. There's a never-ending cycle of stimulations in Silicon Valley. Oh, Mr. Sugie, you've been in Nissan, and then you became a Japanese language teacher. And then why is it now that, Mr. Sugie, you're living in Silicon Valley right now? Well, there's a lot of users in Silicon Valley. Now, this development took place in 2011, and the first prototype was announced in the Tokyo Motor Show in 2011. And there was a lot of contact from the United States, and I wondered about that. And there was a 15-fold difference in the number of users. There's about 300,000 devices being sold in the US, whereas there's only 20,000 devices of this kind being sold in Japan. Now, that's electrically powered vehicles, yes. And it was 110 billion yen market. Well, we carried out this to Silicon Valley, and we tried to live for 3 months to take a tour of what's happening in Silicon Valley, and we got a lot of feedback. And there was a person called Jonathan. At first, that person, when we contacted him, criticized us tremendously. But then he tried it out, and there were a lot of people who called out to him. And finally he said, Jesus. And what does Jesus mean? Well, why did he say that? Well, whereas people used to say, may I help you, or so on, but then people were saying that this is cool. And so he thought that this had potential. And there's a lot of users in the United States, and there are different categories, but there are 2 categories of users in the United States. One, there's a lot of early adopters, people who like something new. Another thing, it's quite easy to interview such people. That's a wonderful culture. It's possible to interview people, and there's a good interaction cycle. New things can be generated as a result, and so that's why I decided to go to Silicon Valley. Mr. Yoshikawa, you worked for a foreign capital company. You were living under very blessed circumstances, and then Mitsui & Company is a very conservative, large corporation. And I visited your office recently. But why is it that you've decided to work so hard in such a rundown office? Well, the reason why I went to Silicon Valley, as mentioned, originally I was working for Red Hat, and then after that, I went to Mitsui & Company to work for an investment fund. And I was stationed in Silicon Valley as a result of that job. In starting up a company, I already had my base of operations in Silicon Valley, so it was a natural thing to start there. But you were residing, if everybody who were stationed in Silicon Valley started their own business, that would cause confusion. Now, why did you decide to leave your very comfortable lifestyle and start up a company? Well, I was doing investment work in Mitsui & Company, and my specialty was enterprise software. That was my domain of expertise, and I saw a lot of colleagues who were starting up their own companies in that field. It's possible to try out ideas with each other. A lot of people point out mistakes in your thinking, or there's a lot of value that you can offer to others. And in regard to the big data area where I'm working in, there's a lot of attention focused there. Now, I had been involved in infrastructure software in the past, and I thought that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I strongly felt that way. That's my candid feeling about this. Well, I'd like to move on to the second question then. You've come to Silicon Valley as a result of different circumstances, but what's the biggest hardship that you had after coming to Silicon Valley? Or what was not a problem at all for you after coming to Silicon Valley? Mr. Sugie. Well, the difficulty that I had was hiring people. In the American market, you have to hire Americans. And it's completely a different situation from Japan. Everybody has 100% confidence about being able to fit into one's company, but you can't really tell whether it's true or not. Looking at the CVs, there's a lot of experiences that are cited in the resumes, but it's not clear, though, where they had a certain type of experience. There are two things about hiring. You have to look at the skill sets that are necessary in that field, and then you have to find someone who fits the mission of the company. In regard to the skill area, it's difficult to tell just by looking at resumes. You should get 3 persons as references who've worked with him or associated with that person. You have to investigate that. You have to absolutely make sure to get references. As for the mission, well, you need a very strong obsession. Hardware takes more time than software, and when things get tough, you have to be very strongly obsessed with what you're doing. Otherwise, the teams may break down. So I asked about whether people have friends in this industry or not. And also, I asked them to work for me at least 1 month. No, I'm not going to go into further detail. I would like to hear more. Well, there's some ridiculous examples. Meaning, there was one person who mentioned that he was a friend of Steve Jobs and had been an early employee of Apple. And I was impressed by the experience, and I thought that that person could be my advisor. But when I really checked in, the photograph is very deceptive that he showed. And I checked out that photograph, and apparently that person in the photograph was an Indian cricket athlete. And I asked about this, and this is my mother's cousin's son or something like that. So I didn't hire that person. It's almost like a fraud. Well, there's some like that. And if you check with people, then you find out things like that. You can be deceived. So you have to check people's reputations. Well, if you look at a wonderful resume in Japan, and if it comes from a manpower company, then you may hire that person. But then many details are inflated in resumes, and you can't really tell the person's track record, so you really have to recheck, otherwise you may suffer a lot of pain. That's something that I've experienced myself. Matsuda-san? In my case, visa is a problem often.
But fortunately, that was not an issue for me. But I had this notion that unless you're in Silicon Valley, you cannot really become a global company. But then when you create your foundation in Silicon Valley, who will be the top leader in Silicon Valley? So that was quite a struggle. Now, one way to think about this is assign somebody from Japan that can speak English and that has the best skill set. But I realized that maybe that will not make this company a true global company. You really have to have that sort of intuition and have the sixth sense towards this market. At least that's what I felt. So I felt that I should be there. I should reside there, which means that what happens to the Japan entity? Now, I thought this through, and I realized that there are, 20-something employees that have worked for more than 10 years for this company. And so I felt that I could delegate the work to the Japanese employees for the Japan entity. And I also questioned or inquired my outside executive officers, and it was agreed that I should be in Silicon Valley. So you maybe had some doubts, but there wasn't much of a worry once you transferred to Silicon Valley? Well, the fact that there were a lot of deals being closed in the U.S. already, and since I am not in Japan all that often, the Japan team can now think for themselves, and as a result, profit has grown, and our stock prices have become 5.5-fold last year. So I think everything is going quite well. So all of the big company employees should move, perhaps. So Yoshikawa-san, what was your biggest struggle? Actually, there wasn't much of a struggle. Well, yes, in terms of creating the company, there were a lot of worries, but originally I was an expat, and I had lived in Silicon Valley for 3 years. I already had a sort of my foundation there. And there was maybe some anxiety when I spoke of my plans to my family, but that was the extent of it. Rather, when I began to consider creating a company and then taking the actual steps, that in-between process, obviously mentally there was a lot going on in my mind. And expats generally have a very cozy package, and you're prepared with a very good package, a comfortable position. But
っていうのがありますけど、まさにその通りで、何か始める時の一番。
So the biggest hurdle is getting there, starting it. And so yes, I struggled with that, but once I decided that I'm going to do this, and once the company began its operations, I did not have the luxury to worry anymore. I really understand that point. I emphasize with that because Hokamura-san, I think you are seeked advice for many people. So even from the same Asian region, a lot of Indians or other countries, country members are going to Silicon Valley, but not that many Japanese. So what are they worried about? Well, I'm sure there are variables at play here, but when I first moved 13 years ago, my first impression was that, yes, you are working for a very big company in Japan. You're on this career ladder or career path, and people tend to worry about things that have not occurred, and me, myself, as well. So when something happens, I always worried about if I did this, but it did not work, what should I do? Or if I did that and it did not work, what should I do? And so as a result, I had my hands tied. And so it was what was Yoshikawa-san just mentioned. It was very hard to take that first step to make that decision. And about 6 months down the line, I realized that yes, I've already started my company, and there was no negative aspect. In other words, starting it was the best thing. So is maybe education in Japan at fault? Because people worry, people analyze, and then if you worry and analyze too much, then you over-worry yourself and nothing works. So why are other Asian colleagues different in their mindset? I think the younger Japanese generation are different, but maybe if you're in your 40s or above, usually the education has been focused on, yes, there is a right answer. You have to take the process to achieve or attain that right answer. So we've not been taught to think for yourself. You've always been given sort of a goal or an answer. You are most evaluated by the fact that you do not make mistakes. So, because of that educational background, maybe perhaps this sort of mentality set in our minds. All right, then I'd like to shift gears a bit here. And living in Silicon Valley, I'm often asked, who are the venture capitalists that are succeeding? What are the attributes of success? I'm often asked at Silicon Valley. So I've put together 4 attributes of success cases. Megalomania. So in other words, very, very confident, overly confident. And it's true, when you are in Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs, for instance, very good example, he is the center of the world. And that is the driving force for operating a company. But the flip side is that because competition is so fierce, you have to have that very strong will to survive. Another is paranoia. That's another attribute of people that have succeeded, because yes, you may be number one now, but you're always worried, you're always paranoid about the fact that somebody else may emerge overnight. And that is all the more why you're very sensitive towards your products or services. You're always sensitive to what your competition is doing. Another attribute is, well, yes, I'm sort of promoting Mikitani-san here, but global. So you do have to have a global mindset. Unless not, you cannot succeed in Silicon Valley. It's not an option, it's a mandate. Now, having said that, megalomania, paranoia, you're paranoid and you're global. Now, this itself, all these three attributes are quite a struggle. So another attribute common is humane. You have humor. And you're lovable as a person. So these are the four attributes that I believe are common threads amongst those that have succeeded in Silicon Valley. Maybe it's the same for big company, conventional company leaders as well. So these attributes, the megalomania, the paranoid, the global, the humane, and I know that each and every one of you have met many people at Silicon Valley, but amongst the panelists, I know you've met many people, and I know that in the audience, some of you may be interested in Silicon Valley, some of you may not be, but who are the people that should immediately catch a plane and fly over to Silicon Valley? Or Japanese should learn from specific entrepreneurs maybe in Silicon Valley. So if you can maybe set some examples for us. So Matsuda-san, we'll start off with you. I think being in Silicon Valley, I think what you do after you succeed is very important. Mark Zuckerberg, he has donated more than 100 billion, and I think it was about 22 billion contributions were made as well by other entrepreneurs as well. So donating back or donating profit is something quite amazing, because when I was at IBM, well, I have been working for this corporation, annual income of 6 million, 7 million. You didn't really want more. But then I realized that I was being very, very self-centric. If I give back to society the extra that I earn, that would be a better option, I realized. So after you succeed, what do you want to do? So you have to sort of have this cycle within you. Unless not, you cannot survive or sustain in Silicon Valley. So people that have succeeded in Silicon Valley give back. And that's why others encourage others to succeed. There's this very, very virtuous cycle that has been established in Silicon Valley.
Mr. Sugie, do you have any comments? Yes. When it comes to Silicon Valley, in regard to what I learned, it's about email. How to fight using email. What this means is that there's a certain episode to illustrate this point. When you're trying to get financing, there's a dashboard, and there may be a spot for 20 million yen. And does anyone want to finance that spot? And then immediately, 5 seconds afterwards, there are people who apply. And it turned out to be quite a big person. I thought it was great. So on the dashboard, there was an interaction of email. And I was away to the washroom for 3 minutes, and then I tried to resume. But then the email stopped. But I thought that person was a key person, so in the second day and the third day, I continued to follow. And then 5 seconds later, an email came back at one moment, and we had interaction. And then if you stop the interaction, then there are members that start to talk with me, and I lost about 5 minutes, and then suddenly I lost contact with that person. And I thought about this, and the conclusion that I got was that everybody's busy. For entrepreneurs or investors, they're tremendously busy. But there was certain momentum, and that person may be looking at an interesting piece of email. But then once that momentum stops, then that interaction stops. So email is like being used like chat. So I think that email is like chat when you're competing. In Japan, there's that difference of sense of speed, but there's also the composition of sentences. In the case of Japan, there's the greetings. You say, "Thank you very much for your patronage." And then there's the main body of the text. And then finally, it says, I would like to request for your best regards. But then in America, it's only the main body of text. It's just productive things. Speed matters. So email is like chat. And when it becomes important, it's best to continue to stay in front of the email for about an hour. That sense of speed is something that I learned in the United States. Yes, in Silicon Valley, decision making is very quick, and the reason why is because everybody's busy. So they're forced to make decisions quickly. As you say, in regard to how to seek quick decisions, well, you have to ride on the momentum. And if you feel the momentum, then you have to immediately move forward. Yes, all the decisions are reached by email, by interview and Google Mail. In Silicon Valley, when you make appointments, and if you look at the email, it's not clear what you want to do. It's very Japanese-like, but there's a very polite letter that is written to exchange opinions, but you don't really understand what that person is trying to do. It's better to just simply say whether one's available or not because you want to discuss about a certain specific subject. In Silicon Valley, it could be a negative thing if you spend too much money. So the busier the person is, the more they want to get to the point of the matter so that they can reach decisions quickly. There's that sense of speed. Yoshikawa-san, would you care to comment on any particular aspect? Well, I don't know about the paranoia, but first of all, the message is please try and visit. There's a person called Bill Type in Treasure Data, and from Shira Ventures, there's a person called Tim Query, an Indian person, and then myself and the co-founder. There's Bill, who is overseas Chinese. And there's also the Indian network that can be accessed through the Indian person. And there's a tremendous investor and entrepreneur network, and that can be leveraged. And they provide a lot of value. Well, the 5 persons here are all neighbors to each other. And I hope to further extend on the circle of acquaintances and also to learn from entrepreneurs. Well, there's quite a few entrepreneurs who have been quite successful. And they have to do everything themselves at the starting point. But then, as a leader, the founder or CEO has to do a lot of things on their own, but they have to establish the vision, the culture, and build the teams, and focus on what that person will do. But then they're 100% focused on what they have to do. And there are quite a few people who are successful that have been able to do this. Mr. Hokamura, which of the 4 definitions would apply to you? Humane? Mr. Hokamura, you have had association with a variety of different people. You've started up a venture. You've met with Steve Jobs. You've looked at a lot of different people. Mr. Hokamura, what are the kind of person that should immediately go to Silicon Valley. Well, we have so many people, so I want to do something useful and talk about something that will be of use. Now, it was over 10 years ago that I started up a company, and there were no Japanese entrepreneurs. So I hoped that there were more Japanese entrepreneurs, and I wanted to establish a network for Japanese entrepreneurs, and I had called for more Japanese people to come, and I was in an MPO for 3 years. And the conclusion is that things didn't change much despite that. So I haven't focused my energies in that area that much. And I've been talking to university and high school students, and now recently to junior high school students. And recently there's a lot of young people that are coming to Silicon Valley, and people in their 20s or 30s have started up companies, but there are also students that are coming. And there was a person from Kumamoto Prefecture. There were about 8 high school students that came, and there was a person from high school who just came because he liked the Apple computer, and that person needed to help in check into the hotel and asked me to do so, so I was willing to help. But more people are starting to take action, admire things and be impressed and come immediately, and they change after 6 months or 1 year. So it's much more worthwhile than the efforts I made towards adults 10 years ago. If we have people from large corporations, no, it's fine if you are stimulated to come, but perhaps for younger people, people with an edge, send them out to Silicon Valley. Tell them to go to Silicon Valley. I hope that you can offer opportunities to people younger than you. People who have reached a high status. Well, Mr. Matsuda is a very good example of a person that did not exist in the past. And for people who can come to Silicon Valley are going to be people who can express themselves very clearly, people who are passionate and are obsessed about doing something absolutely and can assert themselves and are now looking for new challenges rather than do the same familiar thing over and over again. People with such mentality. Well, I'm sure that if you come recently to Silicon Valley, you'll be stimulated. So you should take action without thinking about something too much. Related to this question, I'd like to ask Mr. Hokamura. Naturally, you can establish an environment like Silicon Valley in Japan, and there have been efforts in that area. But what is something that cannot be done in Japan and it has to be Silicon Valley? Logically speaking, it should not be that different from Japan. And why is it not possible to make it something similar in Japan? Well, there's the skies, there's air, there's stimulating people around you. Perhaps we read into things too much. Rather than stand out, if you have a lot of people who are innovative, then you're stimulated. So there's a variety of different ways that you should pursue. And you should come to Silicon Valley and absorb what is being said. As Mr. Isayama has mentioned, the idea is that you should come. People say often that you're paying too much caution or you're reading into things too much, but I thought that as a Japanese that was important.
But on the contrary, this actually impedes what you try to do in Silicon Valley, I realized. And you, again, feel that you cannot make any decisions, concrete decisions. You're just a very good, obedient person. And here in Japan, it's embedded into this culture. We can perhaps make a Silicon Valley-like culture, but it won't be the same because in Silicon Valley, there's this environment that allows you to argue and deliberate and discuss. And well, Silicon Valley obviously is a very special place, even within the U.S. as well. But nevertheless, that is possible because it is Silicon Valley. So Matsuda-san, you have been running a listed company here in Japan. Now, I know that here in Japan, everybody doesn't have to move to Silicon Valley. Obviously, that's impossible. But there are some things that need to change in Japan as well. So what do you think needs to change? From a customer perspective, let me answer that. Because Google, Facebook, or globally successful companies have global customers, have global users, or people that are willing to pay for that global service. Now, when you think about this, Japan originating global companies are very rare. And I thought about this at length, and I realized that when you look for a house, for instance, the houses are very dark and gloomy. And Patina, for instance, it's a bit lively, but from the others outside of Japan, when they look at the retail shops or the cities here in Japan, it's too bright. And a lot of Westerners wear sunglasses. Not that many Japanese are wearing sunglasses. Maybe there is an answer there, because if we create something that is very Japan-oriented, it might be just too bright and flashy. And that very subtle difference actually is resulting in losing customers, perhaps. So Cupertino, for instance, it's a diversity of races. And there are a lot of preferences and states, and maybe you have to focus on the biggest denominator, but as a product, as a prototype, it's already globally tested as a prototype. And so when you launch in India, then of course it's going to be a big hit. But if you create something in Japan, it's designed by the Japanese, and so, it stops there. It's too flashy, or it's too condensed, or it's too cluttered. The websites as well. And Best Buy, for instance, the large retailers, and when you compare that with large retailers here in Japan, again, there's a very big difference on the impression that it imposes upon you. So obviously, if you just focus on something very Japan-oriented, it will just not work. Now, a lot of Silicon Valley's companies are succeeding, but ultimately the customers do decide, the users do decide the fate of that company. So right now, I think it's Silicon Valley where you can be judged fairly. And if we're going to do the same in Japan and import Silicon Valley, then you have to do a lot of fundamental change to make this happen. So the domestic demand, if we were on the rise, then we could focus on things, on details, as we Japanese do, and manuals can be very thick. But unfortunately, the domestic market is shrinking, and people that want to grow and companies that want to be in a growing market, we have to focus on the growing markets. That is probably the point, yes. So not creating something in Japan and taking it to the world, but rather we have to create something with the mindset of having it a global market or service, because how we see things are very different. The world we see and the world that the Westerns see, it's very different. So large Japanese companies do have offices around the world. They have expats dispatched around the world. Why can it not happen? I think it's because the designers own the product. And ultimately, if they have that decision-making, fine. But is there a consensus is another question. Now, coincidentally, I think it's not that coincidentally Apple and Google have succeeded. I think they have been very, very solid in their approach. Simple is better. For instance, iPhone is a very good example. Only the colors white and black. But in Japan, it turns out that we have to customize, and everyone with just the black or the white cover, they customize the cover to make it more flashy and bright and colorful. So functionality-wise, it needs to be simple to be accepted by the global market, but Japan works from the other side. Too many functions, and Westerners are swayed or just don't want to see it. It's too cluttered. So people that can make these decisions, they have to be where the market standard is or where the market de facto is. So that's probably another key point. Yes, I think so. So if it's only a team of Japanese members that decide something, then it will never be a design that works for the world. Nasugiya-san, this is something that I would like to ask you. Now, I know that you're a venture in creating things. Now, manufacturing does take money, and not that many VCs will immediately invest in you and your manufacturer and your Japanese, and it probably in the old days you probably could not present the way you can now. So if a Japan VC could do something like this, it would be much, much easier to solicit funds here in Japan, wouldn't it? But nevertheless, there was something in Silicon Valley. And so can you again state some of the differences? For me, the formula is very simple. Silicon Valley has so many users. America has so many users. 1/3 of the users are in the U.S., at least for this product here, this automatic wheelchair. So it was natural for me to jump into Silicon Valley. Now, I know I am contradicting perhaps the theme of this session altogether, but Silicon Valley, yes, is a great place. And in terms of running a business, it's probably the quote, hottest place right now. But another way of thinking about this is it can perhaps be anywhere, not Silicon Valley. So what you're trying to do, or what you are trying to realize, where are the users? Are they with you? And this is no longer just Japan, it's the global market that I'm talking about here. And there was mention about Europe and China in the previous session, but I think this mindset needs to come first. So where does this mindset come from? Before Silicon Valley, I was in China, in Nanjing, and I was teaching Japanese. It was quite an extraordinary experience. And then 2 years, I traveled around the world, and I had this own initiative in creating new products in various locations. And I realized through this experience that it could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be Silicon Valley. But for us, we realized that this product resonated with the Americans. There were many users in the U.S. And this, how should I call it? These medical device manufacturers or players are very conservative. And so this sort of disruptive product I felt was fit for Silicon Valley. So mindset-wise, I think that it can be anywhere. So Yoshikawa-san, you work for an American affiliate company, you work for a Japanese company, and now you've seen both worlds. You also run a VC. So why can we not import Silicon Valley here to Japan? Why cannot Japan create something like Silicon Valley? Silicon Valley obviously is not a market. The market itself is very small, residents of 3 million. Silicon Valley is not the market itself. The market is entire U.S. or the entire world. So it is a place to operate a company, maybe. It's a place to begin technology. But ultimately, we often say that it's about people, and that goes for companies as well. Now, the liquidity of people or talent is very different between the U.S. and Japan, and I truly believe this because when I started my own company, the precision or the skill sets are very, very precise. So let's say the industry background or the company, where that company stands now, what stage is that company at, is very different. And you can actually hire somebody that is the right fit for that right moment. So let's say EV or sales rep. 100 million company transforming it to 1 billion company, or a 10 billion company converting that to a 100 billion company. The stages are very different, and the sales lead obviously has to be very, very different. And so first, when you're small, you have to find these sales patterns, but the latter, you have to focus on the global strategy, you have to focus on the verticals and how you expand. So these sockets of talents, you can find these talents in Silicon Valley. You can find the right fit.
And the leader has to understand this. It doesn't have to be the founder, but the CEO should be aware very much about that situation. And also, in regard to the granularity of the human resources, up to a certain stage, you may achieve growth for the company, and then if you feel that beyond that, then it's not your responsibility, or you may feel that it's better to hire someone from the outside. Now, I've been told that before. Now, for the company as well as for the employees, not just the engineers, but also the business people as well, it's necessary to seriously look at what role you must play. Well, I'm running out of time. Perhaps we can take questions from the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, there's a lady with her hands up. I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Helen of Kenko-kom, and I'm in charge of the business of China. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I can do innovative work. Now, I'm a Chinese national. Now, we're talking about Silicon Valley here, but there are many young Chinese people who feel that Silicon Valley is a dream for them. And Japan is the most leading-edge country in Asia, and I had admired Japan myself. And in regard to new businesses, I wanted to establish something between China, Korea, and Japan, and I'm trying to do my best. And the question I'd like to ask is that on a daily basis, when we make efforts, both inside and outside the company, there are negative forces, or maybe not necessarily negative forces, but there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of concern. And as I listen to this seminar, I'm very excited. But then at the same time, there's a lot of people who are concerned about the operations of their companies. My company's president is here, and I mentioned that this is not a negative point. I must emphasize this, but what I'd like to ask is the following. Here in Japan, I find many outstanding products which I hope can be exported throughout the world. As I make efforts in this area, for foreign nationals like us, how can we here in Japan exert entrepreneurship? Now, people have talked about this. Here in Japan, when writing email, you have to write in certain ways, and I tend to hesitate a great deal, so that I tend to give up on doing a lot of things that I wanted to do or to have to compromise. So for a foreign national like myself, what can you give us as advice in terms of moving forward in Japan? For foreign nationals and for Japanese nationals, what should be done? Could you offer any kind of advice in this area? Well, it's a difficult question. Please forgive me. That's a difficult question. Would someone care to start? Matsuda-san? Well, I can't understand the intention of the question. Well, when foreign nationals want to do business here in Japan, in order for them to be more challenging and to be able to be an entrepreneur, what must be done? Well, what causes you to hesitate? Was it difficult to understand my question? Well, when you try to do something new, it seems to be different from the existing rules, and there's the pressure to follow the existing rules. For example, writing of email. You have to be polite about how you write your text, otherwise things don't move forward. That's the kind of thing that I feel on a daily basis. You have to compromise yourself, you have to fuse yourself into the Japanese culture, or should I try boldly to stress how different I am? Should I consistently assert myself? Matsuda-san or Sugie-san? Well, you could leave Japan. That's one option. I see. Well, that could be a problem, though. Matsuda-san, could you offer any kind of advice? Well, Please, maybe you can talk directly to the president. Perhaps we could call the president forward. Well, the president is very supportive, and that's why I've continued to this extent. But when we consider Japan as a whole, well, there's a lot of resisting forces that exist. Yoshikawa-san, how would you live through such a situation? Would you be very Japanese-like? Or would you be like a foreign national? I'd look at the other person's face. I do business, and I myself am a salesperson. So in order to be accepted by the customer, I try to take the shortest distance. In Mitsui & Company, there were various processes. And if there's a process because needs for it exist. It may be very rigid in some cases, but it may be flexible to accept that. Or if you're going to give up, as Sugie-san mentioned, there is the option of leaving. Hokamura-san, do you feel you can offer a comment? Well, when I went to Silicon Valley or to Europe, there's a lot of differences. At first, I tried to adapt as much as possible, and I think that you've done the same. You have to do that. But for Japan as a whole, there may be a lot of excessive elements that are unique to Japan, so you should adapt, but also you should not forget your true self and continue to state to your president about what is wrong. There should be more need for diversity. Was that a satisfactory question? Thank you. We don't have much time remaining, so I'd like to enter the wrap-up stage. Please allow me to stand up. In regard to the question that came up, it was very appropriate to my wrap-up. Now, my own answer is that you can find the answer by looking at the panelists. In other words, this session is about Japanese in Silicon Valley, but it doesn't mean that there's anything special about Japanese people in Silicon Valley. And these are Japanese people who left a comfortable environment. So if you find something unsatisfactory about the status quo, you have to make a move. And if you have the capability to do so, you should make the move. Well, I don't think that you have anything to lose by making a move like that. The people you see here left their stable jobs in a large corporation or left a comfortable lifestyle in a very prestigious company. And this is what we see in front of our eyes. Now, what are the principles of conduct that are necessary to do something like that? I learned something from my predecessors, and when I became independent, this was what that person told me. Don't move by thinking about it. Think about it after you've made the move. Now, in regard to how to be clever about going ahead and who should I work with, I was told by my predecessor that I should just simply make the move rather than think about it. I think that's the thing that you have to do. For Japanese people, this is the kind of thing that is necessary to do. But there's a lot of cumbersome things if you try to leave a comfortable environment. No, there's a lot of difficulties in getting the visa, and there's also your family to take care of, your wife and children. It's tough to get a telephone installed. But the important things are going to be cumbersome. I often talk about this. And an artist that I admire greatly has talked about this on television. I was relieved to hear sentiments similar to mine expressed by this person. But why do we go through such a cumbersome process? Well, we've talked about it. In order to survive, you have to adapt to the changes in the environment. You can't live off your savings anymore, especially here in Japan. For those of you who are here, you've paid money and spent your valuable time here. That's because you're really looking at the changes taking place. the Japan Association of New Economy are talking about. And people who make the move are the only ones that are going to be able to survive. That's the thing that I keenly felt. This is a picture of Darwin, and his theory is that those who adapt survive. It's not the strong or the clever, but those who are able to adapt to changes. If you're going to make an act, you should strive for lofty goals. Now there's a president of a company listed in TSE1 moving to a tougher environment to do something grand. This is something that's necessary not just for young people, but also for more elderly people as well. It's important. And I think that the panelists here are like following the thoughts of Steve Jobs in the sense that he wanted to shock the universe. In fact, when I feel various types of questions, that can I really provide such a shock to the universe? Well, I don't want to regret what I should have done in the past. I had been advised by a person sitting next to me in an airplane about this. Mr. Sugie said that if there's an opportunity in the market, then you should go ahead. There may be people who will be happy about that. And if you didn't make the move, then you may regret it later on. But I myself do not want to regret about the past. And I was advised about this in the past. Well, the final words is, don't procrastinate, just do it. That's a motto that I follow. And I think that everybody here would agree with me that you should not be perplexed, but just move forward. With those words, I'd like to close off this session, and I'd like to thank the panelists for their contribution.